I think that one of the mistakes that the modern psychedelic movement made is over-associating the substances with this sort of healing, with somehow like this justice path. When actually, even if you look at indigenous societies, like with ayahuasca, there are many sorcerers throughout the Amazon who use ayahuasca not as a healing medicine, but as a way of building up personal power, and will like shoot poison darts at their enemies on the astral plane. So, these things are non-specific psychic amplifiers. So we're talking about Iboga, Iboga. It's a African psychedelic. It's kind of the only known sort of like pure psychedelic that comes from, kind of like West Africa. It's found in Gabon and Cameroon and Congo. I actually I visited Gabon and went through there's an indigenous community there called the Bwiti. And I went through one of their initiation ceremonies where they feed you tons of the Iboga, which tastes incredibly horrible. And you sort of eat this like, alkaline powder dust. And then they, dress you up in this tribal outfit, and they have you do all these things and look into a mirror, and you see all these visions and so on. And as Jamie was pointing out, one of the characteristics of it is it's very psychoanalytic. It often like shows you, which happened to me the first time I did it. It was like a whole life review, which I wrote about in my first book, where we're shown my childhood and different experiences, and so on. I'm just inviting Doug again. And shown patterns of negative behavior, like drinking too much and so on. It was very relentless. It sort of feels like a very stern father who is like, wants you to do better, but it's kind of like laughing at your faults and so on. It's quite powerful substance, and has all these visionary dimensions too. So did you do it at one of these clinics in Mexico or Costa Rica or something like that? When did you do it?
It absolutely was not in a mansion in Ojai. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Let's just say
Yeah.
it was in a domicile where this sort of thing is allowed.
So yeah, I mean, Jamie and I have been talking a lot about the kind of right-wing assimilation, or the sort of right-wing libertarian assimilation of psychedelia, with the crypto bros and the tech bros and so on. And I mean, what's your current? You said you're going to give a talk about it next week, so it must be present and on your mind. What are you kind of like thinking about it at the moment?
I mean, gosh, I would just say it's somewhere between heartbreaking and horrific, and several things really, right? Like one is, I've been pretty bowled over by the absence of ethical coherence and moral backbone among many people that we know, would consider colleagues, some even friends. And, round one from January, the amount of people that just came back kind of cross-eyed and gaga after being invited to the inauguration and the various inauguration balls, and just a number of people that just seemed like instantaneously in the tank for the whole project based on the promise of access. So that was step one. Had a friend who just came back from hanging out with I won't name names, but the big dumb hat crypto crowd. And they are all swinging hard for the kind of, near reactionary cheering it on, because their crypto wallets are booming. And the Trump family is signaling that they're going to continue to, keep deregulating and keep pushing and pumping meme stocks, etc. So those guys just appear to be along for the ride. And these are also the people, to your, opening point, Daniel, that have been on the NFT ride. They've been on the cannabis ride. They've been on the psychedelic investment ride. They are adjacent or active participants in the Burning Man community, etc. So you would think or hope that if there is any hope for those things as psychosocial agents of change, in order to create a more equitable, just human, humanitarian society, you would sure as shit hope those people would be thinking things through a little more rigorously than they appear to. And instead, they appear to be folding on exactly the same creases that every single sycophantic courtier class always have around the Sun Kings.
It's crazy. It's monumentally insane. Yeah, but I was just on. I'm on a chat with a bunch of the crypto people, and one of them who has a bit of a checkered past. She was part of like Cambridge Analytica and so on. And, she was saying, oh, I just have like, now I'm just a one issue voter. I'm just voting for the ability to tokenize things. And, as long as as long as that happens, I'm happy. And I was like, jeepers, like, what about like human rights? What about, the environment? I mean, you have kids, like, what about what's going to happen to the planet with, this sort of Trump destruction of all, regulations on climate change and everything. It's just seems insanely short-sighted. I don't know, Douglas. What about you? What have you noticed in the sort of shift of the absorption of psychedelia? Which we all hoped. I think when we were younger, we're all from the similar generation, that this was going to be a kind of positive transformational force leading to a more consciousness of equality, more consciousness of non-duality, and so on. And it feels like it's really gone off in another direction at this point. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think there's a way to focus on that part, or the creation of some common ground that gives us a new potential. So for me, this discussion started in 1986 when I saw the Grateful Dead at the Greek at Berkeley. And a bunch of these kind of what I called yuppie scum at the time, rich stockbroker types were showing up in their Saabs and Volvos and Mercedes, and in the second and third row, like, and people that knew that Bobby and Jerry knew their first names. And I was like, what is this? They've done as much or more or better acid than me. And they are rich libertarian, stockbroker, investor, Payne Weber kinds of people. And that was when I was shocked to find out that LSD didn't do the same thing to everybody. But I tried, because I was probably tripping at the time, I tried to bring myself to believe that even though they've taken what looks like a libertarian or fascist metaphor as their own, there's still there's a fundamental faith in this kind of force of life, their connection, just as Trump's connection to the occult and magical sensibility, is a sign of hope, in that if these people realize the world works in a weird way, even if they're going aggro with there's still some, do you know what I mean? There's some common thread. There's some common ground. So I'm still looking at it strategically in terms of what opportunity does this provide? What ways into conversations does this give me for the slow reformation and healing of their obvious karmic debt?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, somebody just called me an adversary. I'm a little surprised. I don't even know who this person is, but whatever. Yeah, I
Well,
think
can I just jump in there? Because Doug,
go ahead.
I mean, what comes to mind as you say that, and boy, oh boy, I'm crossing my fingers and hoping you're right. But that old film, Life is Beautiful, right, with Roberto Benigni, right? That whole
Yeah,
one about the Italian.
yeah, which
And
bothers me
he's
on other levels. Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
But like the core story is he's the waiter in the hotel, and is serving the German SS officer, and they have a wonderful relationship before the war, and they exchange mind teaser puzzles, and then he actually, luck of lucks, finds that that's the sort of Joseph Mengele in his concentration camp,
right,
and he's like, come on, I've got something to tell you, and he really thinks this is it. He thinks he's going to be fucking liberated by this mutual humanity, and the guy just wants to fucking solve another riddle and is going
right,
to send him to the ovens.
exactly.
So, right.
Well,
So
let's
the
go here though.
question,
Let's go in a crazy, personal, dangerous direction. All right. So, when I first encountered you, right? I had people in my ear from the, whatever we want to call it, from the well-meaning progressive left, who were saying, Jamie Wheals fucking talks to the Navy SEALs. He's one of them. He's a rebel wisdom tech bro, misogynist, male mega brain guy, right? And stoicism and optimization and Navy SEALs, Navy SEAls, Navy SEAls. I mean, we can keep saying that one, right? Because Navy SEAls means like some aggro bad thing. And we turned out to be fine, right? And you're not some icky person. So a lot. I mean, not that I can compare you to to
praise, faint praise.
no, but you know what I mean. No, but you know what I mean. We turned out to be like buddies, and you're not all those things, right? You're not. You're not. But there are people who would just take the Navy SEALs thing and say, well, if you've ever even broken bread with a Navy SEAL, you can't come to my Shabbat or whatever. But I have hope that these guys are not, that they're not what we think. Like Daniel and I were at a party last night, and this guy was saying, "Oh yeah, I met one of those." Which one of the he met? One of the
Oh, that guy. He's on Signal chats with Pete Hegseth and so on.
right, and he says this guy isn't as bad as all that, or that he's just got this kind of Marine Army programming and kind of means well, and the way he comes off in media isn't the way he actually. I mean, obviously the guy looks crazy to me, but they're human beings in there, and I find I've been more burned by my prejudgments of people than I have by making friends with people who turned out to be dangerous or bad to me in some way.
Well, let's step back from that for a minute. I mean, I was gonna
Uh,
talk about how I think that one of the mistakes that the modern psychedelic movement made is over associating the substances with this sort of healing, with somehow like this justice path. When actually, even if you look at indigenous societies, like with ayahuasca, there are many sorcerers throughout the Amazon who use ayahuasca not as a healing medicine, but as a way of building up personal power, and will like shoot poison darts at their enemies on the astral plane. So these things are non-specific psychic amplifiers, and they can be used in a lot of different ways. For all sorts of for personal gain and power, as well as healing. I do think that the first time somebody has a major initiatory experience, whether it's LSD or mushrooms or ayahuasca, there's an opening where there's sort of an understanding of the sort of transpersonal dimension, an understanding of like interconnectivity, an understanding that somehow like we and the earth share this sort of karmic destiny. And so like that's very, very common. But I think often what happens is our egos are extremely supple and extremely cunning and clever. And over time, you learn to sort of gamify the experience, or to sort of use it for whatever ends that you want. So for now, for instance, I have all these wealthy people I know in Ibiza who do ayahuasca together all the time, and I think in a way it's replaced like the country club or the golf course. It's like instead of, it's like anthropologically it serves the same function. It's like
Or they do the ayahuasca at the country club, right? That amazing Sabina development with original Alex Grays and the Eleusinian mysteries down a gorgeous spiral staircase to their spa and a temple, right, where they throw down, and it's the highest end situation I've ever seen, and it's completely psychedelic. It's just bougie villa. It's gorgeous.
And I would say that the medicine does improve their communication with their loved ones, their community care. It's kind of like in Burning Man, you find all these camps where people really could be a camp of like crypto bros and gals, but they've all learned to take care of each other and look out for each other during trips. But that sense of care somehow stops there, with their people, and so they're still able to kind of just get very kind of abstract about the sufferings of other people that are not directly in their kind of like purview in a way. Would you say that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, without a lineage and ethic of service, karma yoga, Shiva yoga, good works, whatever it might be in your tradition, without that, it just spins up into I, me, mine, now and next. And I might have experiences of oceanic oneness, et cetera, but I'd never put rubber to the road, and I never actually make any trade-offs on my current material, political, economic, social position or status. I won't jeopardize that. So to your point about it sort of feeling like giving country club vibes, right?
Yeah.
Bottom line is that those folks are like, A, I want to have an experience if it has social cachet or capital. So if I've heard people buzzing about it and talking about it, and oh my gosh, you've got to go, or you simply must, I want it. And then the other is yeah, I want to be not estranged from my spouse and kids. I want to have better life happiness and fulfillment, but it hasn't necessarily asked anyone to shift their moral framework into one of selflessness, and therefore you get those results. If you pour that catalyst or detergent into that particular beaker
Yeah.
of hyper-consumptive individualism, you're going to get more things in that solution, but you're not going to dissolve the beaker itself.
You're
Yeah.
not, but along with it comes a even if it's applied toward weird things, even if it's amplifying the strange things, many of the people who take the substances, right or left, still come to understand a different sort of mechanism at play. You know what I mean? They apply it immediately towards something weird, but I still feel like you're saying they become aware of some hyper sigil like quality of reality, and that itself seems to be is a portal, I think, for us.
I'm not. Yeah, I suppose an interesting. I mean, like, 'cause I was at Hereticon, which we've been talking about. Douglas and I was thing that Peter Thiel's Founders Fund put on, where I met Curtis Yarvin, and they had copies of like H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu books around, and copies of Nicholas Land's books. He's this sort of dark Enlightenment thinker who writes about like Bataille and H.P. Lovecraft and kind of weird, kind of occult nihilism and so on. And sometimes I feel that right now we're living in Curtis Yarvin's bad acid trip. Like, I think, having his psychology, when he was a young person, he probably had some significant psychedelic experiences that just increased his damage and his fissures and his sense of isolation and so on, and built this whole structure of like, okay, like, how could you have like the perfect unbreakable dictatorship, in the US? And then he began to use his intellect to kind of spoon feed that idea out in these very convoluted essays. And now we're all sort of living in this trap, in a way. So I don't know, I guess, to step back, I would say that my concern is that the psychedelic movement that we thought was going to be this enlightening thing, it was like the dedication of my first book and so on, has actually maybe turned out to be exacerbating this, totalitarian, technocratic, techno-fascist, whatever you want to call it, nightmare that we all seem to be like getting lockstepped into right now. That's just my concern.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to be delivering a talk on this, like critiquing the psychedelic renaissance, next week at the MAPS conference in Denver.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm like, okay, so what is it that I would like to say or want to say? And this exact question, which is like, how was it, presumably, so seminal and profoundly impactful and positive in our own experiences, and yet you roll that shit out to not just a small subculture like Grateful Dead and then Burning Man and a few other little fringy places, mountain towns through the Rocky Mountains, etc., and it goes wide. Why did that seem to turn to shit? And all the things you said, set and setting, neutral tools, etc., sure. But then also I was wondering, I was like, oh, is this also a demographic thing? Which is like, that model of like, there are early adopters, and then there's the chasm, and then there's an early majority and a late majority of people who get into something. So early iPhone users, early, whatever, piercers and punk rockers. There's always the early advocates, and that's a tiny percentage, like 15% of total population. And then there's a gap. There's a whole bunch of things that just remain fringe and subculture, and it never jumps the chasm till you get to the early majority and then the late majority. And what we're seeing, and you could say the same about weed, right? Like, how many college stoners would be sitting around listening to Bob Marley going, man, if only the whole world smoked fatties, we would have no more war. Everything would be good, And that's not what happened, right? Cannabis business, venture capital, all the industrial shit, a bunch of people tweaking out on 30% THC stuff, kids going into psychosis. You're like, whoa, 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 that's not what we meant. And where's all the love? Where's all the jar love? And some of that is neutral tools and commodification and a bunch of things. But you could also say it's a demographic chasm. We're hopping the chasm. And those early adopters were always a self-selecting subset. that were particularly interested in those things, but not just those things: the music, the art, the literature, the poetry, the fiction, the politics, right, the spirituality, etc. So quite possibly, we're seeing the same neutral tools applied to fundamentally different cohorts.
Yeah.
And some version of kind of the Pareto split that the first 20% of adopters are going to get 80% of the pro-social universal cosmic compassion and love, and the remaining 80% of the people that get persuaded as these things scale and go wide actually get 20% of the love and light.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? That was an idea I had this morning, so it's a brand new one.
I think that's interesting. I mean, definitely there's an attenuation. I mean, I have like a historical kind of models for that. And my mother was part of like the little beat generation in the late 50s. And they felt like they were holding the sort of precious seeds of this like new culture of like connection and consciousness and spontaneity. But then once it, kind of amped out into the hippie movement, my mother felt that it sort of quickly lost its soul and its sense and kind of became more of a sort of grasping, people who didn't really have the grounding to hold that, kind of space in a way. So
when did she track before? Because obviously the classic in San Francisco is sort of 68, 69, 67.
I think she was beginning to have these feelings like by 63, 64. I mean, she was living on St. Mark's Place, so she was an early adapter in the whole situation, I do want to keep talking about, I really, Jamie and I had a really fascinating discussion, or couple now, around kind of what would kind of like a new kind of initiatory kind of next stage of a religious kind of like opportunity maybe be for where we're at as a species right now. And I want to get into all that, but I feel like we'd be remiss not to just take a little bit of time to comment on what's happening in the last week or so with this sort of like, movement towards martial law, the sort of extremism of what's happening, which I guess is not unanticipated, but I was very much depressed and very sad about it for a few days. I couldn't get out of the news cycle. And actually, I had to do a little bit of a medicine hangout with a friend last night, Douglas, with Greg, and suddenly I shifted gears again. But for a while, I really felt like trapped in the news cycle hellhole. And I'm curious how you guys are processing what's happening, or what kind of insights you might have about maybe Douglas. You want to start?
I mean, I don't have insights. The best insight I can offer, if there's anybody who feels like I'm the kind of person who should have more of an insight than they do, is that I don't. I'm in this with everybody else, just processing it and getting triggered into worrying about kind of personal safety and success and life management, and then scolding myself for worrying about my own self when there's people in such greater vulnerability and harm. And I'm just in that place, and knowing I know how I'm choosing to respond and react to this is by metabolizing as much of the trauma as I can with my nervous system, and being the best neighbor to people in my life and friend to others, and to try to make media or writing that kind of assists people in metabolizing stuff and sort of working it that way. Almost, I don't want to use a word like energetically, but kind of holistically, that the healthier we are psychically, the better we'll be able to co-metabolize what's going on, and the less we will react and amplify the bad shit.
What about you, Jamie?
Gosh, I mean, funny that I said something almost like verbatim to a group on a call last night. I'm like, just because I might be able to like map some of this mayhem does not mean I'm not also fucking right there with you in the trenches, real time, as a human being going through this. I have no idea, honestly, what the hell. I mean, I'm staggered and not surprised by the banality of evil, right? The absolutely kind of like weak sauce, utterly predictable authoritarian playbook that is getting rolled out and appears to be somehow kind of getting traction, even though you can see the creaky seams and stitches and glue and duct tape. You're like, are you fucking kidding me? This isn't an illegal alien insurrection. This isn't a bunch of Antifa Marxists burning down our horrible democratic mayored cities. This is provocative political theater to get the attention off the shitty bill and the Elon Donald spat, and to try and rewind the clock back to George Floyd era woke protests that they can then use as provocation for militaristic clampdown. And this is 1968
Right.
Nixon. So
Exactly.
exactly. Right.
And
Where they go ahead.
and I don't know what and I read a piece by Rebecca Solnit yesterday that was pretty instructive, because I realized I was falling into that sort of, I guess it's a liberal elite camp that was starting to think I wasn't saying, because I don't dare say, because I don't know, because I'm not informed and smart about these things. But I was starting to think internally, well, maybe the left shouldn't react. Maybe when they put troops out, we should stay home, you know, not respond to it. But I don't fully understand the theory of nonviolent resistance, and how to do that in the current environment. And I don't know if it's a 20th century tactic against a 21st century a style of authoritarianism. And when I see, again, sorry everybody, but when I see from so much of the progressive left, similarly um, binary and ill-conceived, ill-thought-out responses and sort of performative antics, I start to think, wait a minute, that this is what I've been writing about lately. We're in a sort of fascistic environment. It's not that so much a fascistic ideology, but a media, technological, social environment of this. Uh, of extremism that we're all suffering from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sometimes feel like I wake up in the middle of the night feeling almost like I'm in like a prison cell already, like looking around for like where's the loose stone, or like how do you build a tunnel out of this thing? Like it feels really hard right now to think about a way out. I mean, I think if we, it sometimes helps to step back and kind of think about this whole bigger sort of meta level of what this process is. That somehow the liberal kind of offer of the sort of, progressive capitalism where people were going to do better materially. Maybe some would do way better, but everyone else would do better and better. Now that we sort of hit the limits of the planet and the limits of the monetary systems and the debt crisis and so on, that system couldn't continue anymore on some level, or not for long. So those who are, I guess this is how I'm seeing it. Those who were in the, had the levers of power and control, financially in terms of capital and military and so on, they have to find a way to engineer a transition to a different system. And they can only do that when everybody is panicking. They have to do it through chaos. So I think a lot of what I see Trump doing, people, a lot of the media is like, oh, he's crazy. These tariffs are nuts. But actually, to me, it actually feels, I could from a from a psychopath plutocrat point of view, it makes sense, right? Because it's like a targeted attack on the middle class and the upper middle class, right? If you have a little company, or if you import, furniture, or you make something overseas, you're basically stopped. You can't do your thing. So yeah, it does feel like the goal is to really bring us into a new sort of socioeconomic structure, which is a kind of serf class, a large serf class and a much smaller kind of oligarch class. And I don't know how, when that class has the military and the surveillance and the intelligence at its disposal, I don't know exactly how you beat that. Any ideas? Or do you agree with that analysis more or less?
I agree with the outcome. I don't agree with the mechanisms or the coordination to get there.
Explain. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I think it's the classic, right? I mean, how do we end up with this kind of late stage capitalism where everybody's a hyper individualist and buying too much cheap plastic shit? Like, who's doing that to us? And you sort of feel like it's actually a sort of weirdly consistent and coherent egregore, or whatever you want to call it, that doesn't necessarily have 12 cigar chomping men in the background.
No.
Right. And I think the same for this, right? That we are lurching towards a militarized panopticon techno-feudal state appears like kind of where we're heading unless something magical intervenes.
Right.
That Trump himself is the coherent and self-aware architect of that, I don't think. Right. No. because I think it's massive opportunism across a spectrum of drivers and motivations, which certainly for him is money, power, and revenge, and for others like the technocrat is pretty much money, power, right, and a handful of others. And this whole thing is this complex, chaotic shit show, and where there's any open spaces or where any walls are breached or any advantages can be gained, people are, various agents and players are swarming into those vacuums or voids, and then taking, and then annexing them and then turning them to their advantage. So like Doge wasn't planned. Doge was written on the back of a napkin in Mar-a-Lago between November and the inauguration, but nonetheless, it was on the chessboard. And
Yeah.
and then Elon got to breach the walls, but then Project 2025 is going through, and Stephen Miller's erstwhile Katie was calling in the airstrikes, right? And so you have all this opportunism, this constantly dynamic, chaotic system, but that it all goes to where you're saying, I think is true. I just would say that the coordination is more haphazard and opportunistic than coherent, even though you could sort of say, holy shit, I think we're heading to a totalitarian surveillance state and the complete gutting and hollowing out of the American workforce. And you're like, yeah, I think that is happening. But it's sort of happening with malice and intent, but not necessarily singular.
Yeah. Douglas, what are your thoughts on this arena?
I think that these guys, again, I'm not an expert, so I'm just sharing.
None of us
I'm
are I don't
I'm
go
an
ahead.
uncle. I'm the uncle in the back of the car, right? With the awful opinion. But I think that Mumford's analysis of technology is the same as my analysis of politics. And that's not that the technology doesn't impact the society, but society creates the space and has a readiness for a new technology to emerge. I think that the collapse of institutions, of 20th century institutions in America, has created a standing wave for these guys to jump into. And while they can take credit for the hollowing out of the middle class or accelerating the hollowing out of the middle class and the collapse of educational institutions, the reason our universities are collapsing under Trumpism is not just Trumpism, but because they surrendered themselves decades ago to becoming feeders of corporate America, with presidents of universities going to CEOs of oh, Daniel's gone. Presidents of universities going to CEOs of corporations to find out, what do you want, or what skills do you want our students to have? So once a university goes and does that, it's already created the formal cause for, if we want to get Aristotelian, they've created the formal cause for this kind of authoritarianism, or whatever you want to call it, to emerge. So I'm trying, again, this is me, just what I do. I'm trying to take, am I flashing for you or just for me? I'm like flashing back and forth for me. Oh, okay.
You're also doing great.
All right. For me, I'm taking the emphasis off the dudes and putting it onto the way we're creating space for this dudism to happen.
I mean, yeah, for sure.
Because I don't like talking about them. I'm sick of it. Except for Nick Land, who has like time travel and stuff in his book that I'm kind of interested in, even if he is a crazy fuck. The rest of them, I just don't care. I mean, they're there. They're figures. They're figures, and they're on the TV, and I can't change that. I can change the ground in which those figures are operating.
That's why I love you, man. You always come up with the skillful reframe, not just the novel one, but one that's sincere but also rigorous. Like you got
right.
chops.
And I love you. You know, I wasn't saying you were an evil fuck. I was saying that a particular person told me that you were like this evil fuck, like working for the army and shit. And you know what I mean? And then I was like, oh no, he seemed really nice. And then but they said again, no, you didn't get it. He was really doing evil fuck to you. And then I met you again, and I'm like, no, he seems nice. I like him, and I get all sorts of weird ideas from you and stuff. But so you know what I mean? So it's like an example. Like, I mean, I'm sure it wouldn't happen. Or who knows? Maybe I'll meet Trump or that Guest guy. What's that guy? That's the army guy that to meet that guy. Maybe he's nice. But so confused.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm actually where I'm headed and why I'm in a car right now is to the guys who were just with Hegseth in DC last week and going deep on this stuff. And I mean, and we've just seen um, so much line crossing. Oh, what's just happening here? Did he just dump
He's
everybody?
moving us. He wouldn't
Oh,
join
yeah.
us.
I heard
Start
that this
over. So what happened? Some stuff here is happening in California, I heard. That's about it. I
what's
don't
happened?
remember anything. I don't know. They were doing protests and government crackdowns. No, they took me into the back room and they gave me some shock treatments between then and now. I've forgotten everything. I've forgotten everything. No, we had a
You were
nice
at
little thing. Um, I was telling uh, Jamie that I feel, much more able to influence the ground than the figure, which is why I've been focusing on sort of people in the community and what I can do down here and trying not to worry, but not to focus so much on, Trump or Hegseth or any particular dude um, on the other side or whatever that supposedly is on the other side of the screen, much less the other side of the political spectrum. I'm kind of counting on Bernie and AOC to do that lifting
yeah. Um,
because they live in that world.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely been. I mean, this today. I'm impressed with Gavin Newsom. Um, his. Oh, okay. Hold on. He's on as a viewer. Let me see. Jamie, maybe just. Oh, here I got him. I got him.
I mean, that's why I'm so weird at these things. It's like the impromptu ones I'm weird at because I feel like there's a implied communication that what I
Mm,
have to say now is worth hearing. And I'm an old book writer. So I believe that if I'm going to have someone read a book that I wrote, that it should be to have 2 years of compressed knowledge to be worth the 6 hours of reading it. The same with a 1,500 word article. There should be at least 2 or 3 days of thinking that moves into the 7 minutes that I'm expecting from them. So then I get worried to like, oh, I'm just gonna, I feel all Joe Rogan-y about taking real time from somebody else with uncompressed real time musing from myself.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It does. Go ahead,
100%.
Jamie.
Well, I mean, yes, I feel I've never thought of that, but as you say it, it's like, hell yeah, I don't like to half-ass it or think in public. It's like
Right.
you're you
Unless we're sharing the process. That's why keep moving there, in this conversation to say, okay, what I can share that's of value is I'll share the process that I'm going through right now. I'll share the real thought I'm
Yeah.
having. I'll share the doubt that I'm having, so it's about this.
or the jazz, right? Because there's still a note you hit
Right. That's
10
true.
minutes ago where I was like, oh shit, you said I don't
I
know
know. Daniel
if
missed it.
yeah. So let's reboot it,
I
which
did
is
a little. Yeah.
you just said that idea of I don't know if 20th century methods or modes of nonviolence are still applicable in this 21st century moment we live in, or something to that
Mm.
effect, right? And I had that exact thought last night because I was like, on a call with a bunch of people, and then they're sort of like, well, what do we think is going to happen? I'm like, well, I think that basically this summer is going to get spicier. I think this is intentional. The timing is on purpose. We're going to hit Flag Day and parades and birthdays this weekend. We'll see how that goes. We're going to hit July the 4th after that. There's all these kind of seminal mimetic milestones that will, without a doubt, be politicized and weaponized. So let's just hunker down and a plan for a Spike Lee summer.
Mm.
And what will that mean? And what will that mean as the cruelty is the point gets more and more shoved in everyone's faces, and children detentions and suspension of habeas corpus and increasing violations of all the things we hold near and dear as Americans, blah, blah, blah. So you're like, all right, well, now we get into, oh, what is
Uh-oh. Did he freeze?
this like? Have all those things, and we will overcome. And step one is the left has to go back and reclaim its soul force lineage from MLK and that era, not the uppity fuck SJWs from the George Floyd era. That's who the right is itching to give a beat down to, and they earn exactly zero sympathy with Middle America. So how do we go back and reconnect to truly principled civil nonviolence on behalf of higher causes and a reminder of this great American experiment. Okay, yeah, neat. That sounds like a decent thing. But then you realize, oh shit, to your point, Doug, this is not the 1960s. And even if you think of like the whatever, half dozen most iconic images of civil rights and anti-war, you have the Vietnamese monk, you had the little girl lit on fire with napalm. Those two images embodied Vietnam. You had Martin Luther King over the reflecting pool and I Have a Dream. You had Bull Connor and hoses, and you had that German Shepherd lunging at the kid, and you had the hippie chick putting flowers in the barrel of the Pentagon gun. Like that was the 60s in a capsule. You had like 6 photos in Time magazine and Life and wherever they showed up. These days, we just have AI enabled slop and no one even believes shit.
Yeah,
And you have this, like in Gaza right now, you have hardcore Zionists and even moderate Israelis dismissing their lying eyes, dismissing rolling video footage of women and children bombed to pieces because they're
yeah,
saying that it's called Hollywood, which I didn't even know was a thing. Have you guys heard of this? That Palestinian Hollywood, that all of this is being done. These are crisis actors. It's full Alex Jones level shit, but just at the level of international conflict. And Israelis are literally disbelieving it and thinking that it's all an elaborate psyop. So now how do you do principled civil nonviolence when it used to be one black and white image would move the world? And now we have streaming live footage and no one's even believing it's real.
totally. Just to go back into a bit of like, meta thinking or meta. I mean, I always was very taken when I wrote my book, How Soon Is Now, with the famous caterpillar to butterfly kind of metaphor, where the idea is that it's not that the caterpillar sprouts wings in the cocoon, but actually as the caterpillar consumes everything around it, it sort of begins to melt down to this biotic goop, and there's these group of like imaginal discs or imaginal cells that are begin to like propagate, but then the immune system of the caterpillar attacks those cells, but somehow as a result of that attack, the cells get smarter and stronger, and somehow learn from that how to take over the whole body of the decaying caterpillar and turn into a butterfly, which is this new, pollinating species, so on, flying species, and so on. So in a way, like it feels like maybe we're in that. I mean, I like this metaphor in terms of where we're at now. Like, yeah, like those old tactics aren't going to work anymore. The tactics of the fascistas, the control maniacs have evolved rapidly, and the question is, even if we don't see it yet, is there the potential for that type of, evolution of intellect and strategy and, collaborative, oomph among
Well,
those who really want a different outcome? And then
right. I
how do
mean,
we
my
support that, as best we can to be the emergent property of the system?
my concern is that's exactly the same argument I hear from some of the effective altruistic accelerationists, that we are the larval stage of the species and they are the thing. So they might as well just consume us and our resources and everything about us in order for them to get to the next planet or the next level. That we're dead caterpillar and they're the live butterfly.
Do they go so far as actually saying like us, we super ubermensch are the ones and you lot are not? Have they drawn those lines?
Yeah, that
Wow.
we're the larval stage of the species. That we're the larva living on the fucking shit.
Yeah. Well, and that is possibly, not completely. I mean, this is like there's a parasitic group and there's a host. The parasitic group is growing in strength, on the body of that host in a sense. I mean, there's some truth to that. Um,
Right, but
but
who's the
where
parasite?
there
You
are
know,
important like memetics and myths, right? Like, what is, somehow, I mean, it feels like the reactionary far right over the last 15 years managed to make huge inroads, both in terms of like media and in terms of mythos in a way. And, even something like, Me Too, which obviously we probably all agree was sort of a necessary, kind of thing, in a way. There was an imbalance in that sense, but the men who mostly got wiped out or, seriously broken by that, kind of movement were mostly on the liberal and progressive side. So as this, reactionary right wing thing began to coalesce and to grow in power, you didn't have the Charlie Roses and the Matt Lauers and the Louis C.K.'s and all these people who, if they had still been in their sort of power position, at least sort of been fighting for the sort of liberal kind of ideology, even like feminist, perspective and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of to me, everything feels like we're in an evolutionary. We're like, somehow there's a karmic inevitability. I mean, I look at things from kind of an occult perspective. That doesn't mean we get out of this without going physically extinct or, having 1,000-year Reich or whatever, wherever this is going. But it helps me somehow today, anyway, to feel the sort of karmic inevitability of this whole situation, right? Like, if this thing was waiting to coalesce, if there was this much white supremacism, Nazism, techno-fascism, underlying the U.S. experiment, there was at some point, or other quite soon, that was going to emerge and reach its fluorescence. So now, is there a capacity for, the larger group who don't really want that, to figure out how to coordinate, cooperate, build new structures, kind of like out compete, in different ways, maybe not militarily, this thing, I mean, do you see that as even possible? I don't even know if I do, but that's where it seems to me we're at right now.
I mean, one of the things I've been noodling on this week, and I don't think I'm coming to a satisfying conclusion on it, is just fundamentally pendulum swings of history, right? And you're like, okay, well, where are we now? And clearly, we are in a pendulum swing / backlash to, say, 2014 to 2022 of illiberal leftism, right? And and it's coming back, and we now have illiberal alt-right. And you're like, okay, so that's in some respects weirdly hopeful. You're like, whatever's happening now is only going to happen for X number of years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, something. And then you have a return. The thing that concerns me is that we are in no way in a steady state ecosystem. And the decisions that are taking place during this particular pendulum swing are exacerbating and accelerating a whole bunch of conditions that will be waiting for us wherever this pendulum drops us off next. And that the conditions are likely going to be worse, less stable, less predictable, more volatile, less abundant, and therefore more prone to perpetuating things like this. And what I'm unclear on is, does the pendulum kind of just get pegged over in tribal totalitarianism until we run out of fucking oxygen, food, water, whatever it might be? I don't know. It doesn't feel like a nice 20th century kind of back and forth, and you can plot it on a chart and bring Peter Turchin into the equation and, think we have some control over this.
Right. But on the other hand, in 1942, it probably felt pretty damn bleak also, like, when you're in the dark shadow of, the dark night of the soul, the initiatory hell, you're not supposed to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Because as long as you're, too easily able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're actually not in that, that phase of complete, Negretto or whatever it's called. Like, we're now it feels like we really are in that blackness, where the numb thing, as this tantra teacher Bruce Lyon calls it, where we can't see a way out. That in itself is interesting. Or it's just something to study in a way. Because that also is, in every film there's the that period, and maybe those narratives don't function anymore.
I'm hoping they don't.
What's that?
I'm hoping they don't, that we're out of the kind of Aristotelian hero's journey, which are always based on, crisis, climax, conclusion, that conclusions are for young people. They're bedtime stories, so you can get to sleep. Adults need sustainable narratives, ongoing stories that don't end.
Did you read that in Eon that just came out this week on that?
No.
It's literally that thesis.
Okay.
To say enough with the tidy 3-act structure story.
That's what I've been writing since 1995. That's been my angle. What we wanted interactive. That's what I thought the net was going to be for the open-ended
hypertext.
Yeah. Remember?
I saw a number of people in the comments are bringing up Terence McKenna and Time Wave Zero, which is always fun. I mean, it does feel like we're in a very we've plunged into, after McKenna maybe not feeling so relevant for a decade or two, now McKenna feels like right on the money in many stories,
Yeah.
you know.
More
Um,
relevant, more than Leary, the I'm not getting our ethereal exo whatever, exo evolution planetary thing. We're getting much more of the Terence McKenna increase of total novelty and the unrecognizable world.
yeah. But I'm curious, Douglas, from so not honoring, agreeing that Aristotelian hero idea is a little bit past tense. What would you see as an intervention, as a media theorist, as a cultural theorist, or as a story writer? Like, what would you imagine would be a kind of different type of intervention that could be helpful in this situation?
I mean, so I guess it's what I'm trying to do is get people to stop and breathe and meet their neighbors and experience their feet on the ground, connect with their body, and get introduced to their gut biome. I mean, it's like super basic. I feel like if 50% of us were walking around in coherent, less fragile, brittle ways, so much would be better. How much less fucking Twitter shit would get just reposted? It's like, you know, it, that's right now, that's all I can think of. And then go out when Naomi Klein or AOC or someone tells us to go outside and do something, I'll go do it. I'll go stand in the street or, do what I'm supposed to. But
And what about you, Jamie? Do you see like, and I also wanted to get into this a little bit of this discussion around this sort of kind of repurposing religious structures, which I thought was a very interesting idea that you're working with right now.
Mm. Well, unfortunately, I have to jump now. But so I'll
Yeah,
leave with this one response. We'll have to pick up the Illuminati cult on another day.
perfect.
But I mean, to Doug's point, I think that's beautiful and necessary. Touch grass. Like there's 1,000 ways to kiss the ground, kind of thing. Like so hell yes to that, and that works quite well for most things, but not necessarily like totalitarian takeover in the streets.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes sort of almost solipsistic, head in the sand.
right.
So you're like, so to your point about when Naomi and AOC give me the call or throw up the bat signal, I'll be there. I'm almost thinking like, well, when is there and where is that signal in the sky? And because for me, right, like, I mean, this isn't really real, but cheat code would be sort of other men can fend for themselves, but when women, children, and nature are under survival threat, I feel, some version of like, all right, when you to fucking get off the couch and stand up and be counted and be between them and harm. And so that sense of like, where are we right now? And we're all, you know, blessed and privileged to think things and write things and share things and more or less make a living ish from that pursuit. Right. And we like to think that we have a platform or an audience or leverage or whatever the fuck you would say. But really, at what point do you accept that I'm going to deleverage myself and be one more body, one more citizen, one more set of arms and legs and hearts and eyes to bear witness with zero fucking leverage? And I'm just meat to get beaten or gassed, or whatever. Like to me, that's the New Testament bit. Like Jesus doesn't have his apostles yet. First two dudes he goes to is on the Sea of Galilee, and they've got brand new boats, right? It's Andy and what's his bucket? It's Andrew and maybe Peter or somebody, and they're like, he's like, come on, and the midrash of it is sort of like, well, actually, they just bought these boats. They were stoked. They had new boats and new nets, and they were finally going to make bank. And they're like, we're good. And that's when he lays it on him of like, put down your nets and come and be fishers of men. When is that moment where you bet on a fucking low odds play and you put down your identity and you put down your structure and you put down your safety and your future and you just go and do the thing because it's required? And that one haunts me. I still don't know the answer for myself.
I love it.
All
Well,
right.
we didn't have a lot of answers today, but we had a lot of great questions. I really love you guys. Really, I think we should, do things like this on a more regular basis. And yeah, we had 1 point over 300 people, kind of little eyes blinking at us. So let's talk again soon. And Douglas, let's hang out soon in New York, any moment, in fact. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for
Cool.
coming.
Hey, everybody. I saw Erwin. Hey, Erwin. I love you. Okay. Be
Ciao, ciao.
good.